Hey everyone, I'm here with Ansley Samson, General Counsel for Everglades Law Center. And today we're going to be talking about a lawsuit filed by the sugar industry that could have completely derailed Everglades restoration. So in summer of 2021, the sugar industry filed a lawsuit against the Army Corps of Engineers. What was all of that about, and why did that come up in the first place?
The sugar industry, 3 different companies and organizations filed these lawsuits to challenge the Everglades Agricultural Area Reservoir. So this was a comprehensive Everglades restoration project, and the sugar industry came in to challenge it so that they would be assured to get a larger amount of water from this Everglades restoration project.
Gotcha. So, I mean, it kind of sounds like they were afraid if the EAA reservoir gets built, that we know would help Everglades restoration tremendously. You know, it's the main factor in this whole project. Were they just afraid that it would take water away from them from, watering their crops, or what was their fear?
I believe their fear, it wasn't that this project was actually going to take more water away from them. They were concerned because an earlier action of the Army Corps, when they changed operations of Lake Okeechobee, something called the Lake Okeechobee Regulation Schedule that was changed in 2008, that decision by the Corps had taken away some of their water. And the sugar industry wanted that water back. So it wasn't that the reservoir was going to take more water away from them, it's that it wasn't going to be operated to give them water back that they had lost in 2008.
They did this lawsuit because they felt like they were owed water that they lost, but have they ever had an experience of drought or anything? Have they ever suffered a loss economically?
So based on the data, what you see is that in times of water shortages, when other users are being cut back, sugar uses less water than they are allocated, and their yield, the amount of sugar they're getting per acre, isn't going down. So in times when you have a drought and and sugar has a certain amount of water, it's allocated, it's using less than what it's permitted to right now, and it's still producing the same yield per acre.
Yeah, so they've never suffered, from what we know, an economic loss from anything regarding their own crops. They've always been profitable year after year. Meanwhile, the Everglades is dying, has no water at all. So it's almost like if they didn't suffer any economic loss, then why do they still want this water so bad?
I think they want an insurance policy. They want they want to have that water there. I mean, their argument in this case is that, that it could be one, it could be harmful to them, but even sort of beyond that, that this is water that, that they need to get back. This extra water sitting in Lake Okeechobee so that it's there in case they need it.
That's interesting. It's almost like if there was some industry backing the Everglades, they could sue and be like, what about water we never get? You know what I mean?
Right, I mean, yes, the Everglades does not, the Everglades doesn't get that water.
Another big part of this, and it's interesting because this was a huge deal. Obviously we recently just came out victorious with this lawsuit, but you didn't really hear about it, and this is like a big deal. If they would have succeeded in this lawsuit, the Everglades Agriculture Reservoir might have not been built. So kind of speak to, the significance of this win.
Right. I mean, this was a huge deal. The sugar industry came in with a novel argument about a law that, a law that's been around since 2000, and they came up with this new interpretation that would have taken a huge amount of water that otherwise would have gone to Everglades restoration and sort of held it in reserve for for the sugar industry. And so even if the reservoir had been built, here's a good example, like this reservoir, as it's being built, it is designed to provide a certain amount of water, 240,000 acre feet of water for the Everglades. The sugar industry said they needed to get 500,000 acre feet back. So the amount of water that the sugar industry was asking you to be held in reserve for them, was double the capacity of this reservoir that was going to be devoted to Everglades restoration. So you can imagine, even if this reservoir is built, how it can be operated and where the water that it's storing can go would be severely curtailed. Instead of all this water, over 200,000 acre feet a year, and I wish I could come up with a perfect metaphor of what that exactly equates to, but that water, instead of going to the Everglades, would need to be held back for water supply for sugar. So that's sort of thing one, but that's not all. This argument in this case would go beyond this one reservoir for this one Everglades restoration project. It was an argument about the entire comprehensive Everglades restoration plan. And it was an argument that said, we need to hold sugar harmless from a whole host of things that have happened since 2000. In this case, it was about basically protecting the Herbert Hoover Dike, like dam safety. The Corps changed operations of Lake Okeechobee in 2008 to protect the communities around Lake Okeechobee from a catastrophic dike failure. And the sugar industry was suggesting that Everglades restoration projects that are built 15 years or more after that shift need to be operated to hold them harmless from that totally unrelated thing, that totally unrelated event. And if that argument was correct, then there are a lot of other Everglades restoration projects and a lot of other things that can happen between 2000 and when the Everglades restoration project gets built that could take water, that could impact the sugar industry's water supply, and that suddenly an Everglades restoration project would need to be operated to compensate for.
It's just funny because it's almost like they issued this lawsuit kind of kicking and screaming that it's not fair that we're making these changes with the lake regulation schedule, we're building this reservoir, all great things for our environment. And the funny part is or not funny, the St. Lucie estuary, the Caloosahatchee estuary, and the Everglades have suffered for years, for decades, just absolutely devastation, just economic losses that are unbelievable. And now the one time where they have to, give a little bit, they're just like, no, we'll file this lawsuit. I just think it's kind of ridiculous. Is that kind of the right way of thinking about it?
I mean, I think if you look at what has happened to like both the environment and the economics and businesses around the St. Lucie and the Caloosahatchee estuaries for decades as a result of the way in which Lake Okeechobee was operated, as a result of pollution in, that polluted water that gets diverted to those estuaries. If you look at the Everglades and the extent to which, it has been starved of water for decades, and the impacts to the whole host of communities that rely on the Everglades, we have decades of harm, to the east, to the west, and to the south. And this is we need to undo that harm, and that is exactly what the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan is about. It is about finding ways to undo that harm, and the idea that we should repurpose comprehensive Everglades restoration projects to, instead of restoring the Everglades, to ensure providing additional water supply to the agricultural industry. That is not what the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan was about.
Yeah, in this past year in February, we fought Senate Bill 2508, and then I know this lawsuit was initially filed even before that, but I'm just kind of trying to get across the point that there's going to be another situation like this. Like, do you think something else will be coming up soon, or what can people expect? You know?
Sure. I mean, even in the realm of how the Corps operates Lake Okeechobee, they're in the process of designing another regulation schedule for Lake Okeechobee, the Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual, and that is in the works right now. And the sugar industry is arguing hard for changes to that to give it more water, to ensure they have more water, and to, again, among other things, to get back the water that they lost in 2008 from from the Herbert Hoover Dike dam repairs. So we have an ongoing system operating, a change to Lake Okeechobee operations right now, and Sugar is arguing many of the same things that they argued in the case that we just won.
Yeah, and aren't they arguing for excess water? Like, LOSOM isn't going to affect their bottom dollar at all, or is it?
The way I understand it, a lot of the problem is that they're arguing that water should be held in Lake Okeechobee at a higher level, and in case they need it. The problem is they don't. They often don't, and so then that excess water needs to get released to the estuaries, and so it's water that's held in reserve, and then when it's not needed, it winds up getting released to tide. So it harms the lake's ecology when the water levels are that deep, and it harms the estuarine ecology when the water gets released when it's not used.
One thing, kind of how I was saying earlier, like, this was on nobody's radar. I mean, obviously you and I are within this space, but is there something the public could do to like know about these things? It always seems that, it's always like a shady something going on. It's like, it's never in the public eye. Like, look, the sugar industry is making this lawsuit to get water that they believe that they're owed from years in the past. So what is something, the average person can do to stay informed?
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, when the Corps makes decisions about these operations, there is a public process. Like, they issue public notice, and there is a public meeting where you can come and testify. You can write a letter expressing your concern. These public meetings, it's hard to attend it as just a member of the public and make the time. So, I mean, I think it probably makes the most sense for interested members of the public to get involved with groups like Captains for Clean Water and others that are following these processes. Like in our case, we represented, in that case that we were involved in as a friend of the court, we represented 7 groups, including Captains for Clean Water, that advocate for the environment from the Keys to the Everglades to the St. Lucie to the Caloosahatchee. So we had representation from groups that were interested in all those different areas. And so I think if you're an interested member of the public, probably the best thing, the easiest way for you to stay involved is to find environmental groups in your community that you can be part of and that you can support.
So like I kind of mentioned before, this lawsuit, wasn't on many people's radar, but what would happen if this did go through and we didn't come out victorious? Like, what would happen to Everglades restoration as a whole?
I think it would be very hard for Everglades restoration to continue, because all of this incredibly expensive infrastructure that the state and the federal government are helping fund would have to be repurposed to make up water lost to water supply, to agricultural water supply, and there wouldn't be any water left for Everglades restoration. The amount of water at stake here dwarfed the amount of water the project would make available for Everglades restoration. It's hard to imagine how you would design projects to serve as an insurance policy for agricultural water supply and restore the Everglades. So I don't see how it goes I don't see how it would have gone forward if this interpretation had been accepted by the court. I mean, and they may appeal, like this was a trial court decision. They can go to an appellate court and try to get it overturned, and they can raise this same argument again in the next round of Lake Okeechobee operation. So I'm not convinced that we've seen the end of this argument. We may see it again.